within a certain time structure. I'm going to introduce Maritza in a half a minute. Before I introduce her, I thought it's really, really important. We go back to someone who is one of the major figures having to do with Holocaust history, etc., a Nobel Prize winner, and I'm talking about Elie Wiesel. So Elie Wiesel, for those of you that know, besides being an amazing author and an amazing human being, also was a great professor for many, many years at Boston University. I did a lot of his writing, and he taught a course there for I don't even know how many years, but interesting. I met one of the people that was his sort of like assistant, who became an assistant to him, and he actually wrote a book about the classroom that Elie Wiesel was teaching. I want to read something from Wiesel that I think is important as we begin. So he wrote, "All we can do is tell the story, and we must. But in order to tell the story, we must first hear the story. Listening to a witness makes you a witness." Here's how you can tell the difference between false prophets and true ones. He explained this to his class. He said, the former, that is the false prophet, gives you comfort. The later, that is the real prophet, disturbs you. At the heart of learning, people are morally ignited less by the cognitive processing of learning information than by the visceral experience, less by the intellect than by the nervous system. Moments of gooseflesh, chills up and down the spine, the welling of tears. This is the only way a student can become a witness. Maritza, Shelley, who we're going to hear from in a half a minute, has a story that I think we need to be witness to. She will tell you about Hungary, 1944, and her own particular moment in that Holocaust period. She will talk to us about a lot that happened to her personally. And here's the thing that I walk away with, and as we listen to this, that's also important. She had, once coming to this country, she had an amazing life, really had an amazing life. We have to remember there is normalcy. There was people who had achieved a lot, including Maritza. Later in her life, she got a degree from New York University in humanities and art history, got involved with the Brooklyn Museum. It's a filling life. Has a daughter, has a granddaughter, which is also part of the story. So I want you to know there's a continuum that we're all on. So what I'd like to do, and this is specifically for the boys and girls and everyone else, if you don't mind, just to be respectful, I'd like you to put on your screens. You can mute yourself for a little bit. We will have an opportunity later on to ask questions. And I'd like to give everything over to Maritza Shelley.
Hello. Good evening, and I hope you all enjoyed playing in the snow. But now I am afraid I have to take you back to 1944. But before that, just to go back to Elie Wiesel, how important it is to listen to witnesses is because, unfortunately, there are really no witnesses who can talk about what happened under 80 years. So very soon, in a way, we will not be around to tell the story. That's why I think you have become the witnesses as you listen. Anyway, in 1944, of course, the war has been going on for quite a while, and the Jews of the countries that the Germans occupied were already in either ghettos or from the ghettos to the concentration camps. And many of the 6 million Jews who were killed have already died. But the Jews in Hungary were somewhat protected because Hungary fought on the side of the Germans. So Hitler allowed the Hungarian regent, the head of the country, to deal with the Hungarian Jews his own way. And although Regent Horthy was not very enamored with Jews, but at least he did not feel like he needed to exterminate them to control the life of the Jews. So we had a lot of problems in Hungary. Anti-Semitism was very much alive, and but at least our lives were not threatened. So in a beautiful Sunday afternoon, early afternoon, on March 19th, 1944, my sister, who was 3 years older than I, and some friends went to hear a lovely concert in a church. And when we came out, there was something very strange. Although we were used to seeing soldiers, but all of a sudden there was this huge container of soldiers and military machinery and tanks. And there was something very strange about them. They didn't look like Hungarian soldiers. And so we found out that they were Germans, and Hungary was being occupied by Germany. So at that point, the German duty was to not only to protect their army from the Russians who were approaching Hungary, but also to exterminate all the Hungarian Jews as fast as possible. So when we got home after the concert, my parents were there, and my father was on the phone making some arrangements to get some false papers. I still don't know how he knew about this and how he knew where to call. I later found out that there was an underground Zionist group, a young group, and they created these false papers for Jews. So unfortunately, even though we got those papers, we were not using them as soon as we could have. So after the Germans came in on the 19th, very quickly, within days, the so-called Jewish laws were enacted. The first thing, of course, was to wear the yellow star. All Jews have to wear it. And if they found you not wearing it, that was a pretty deadly sin. And then, although they did not establish a ghetto then, but they did select buildings that they decided that the Jews could live in. And they had Mogen David, Star of David, on the door of the building. And Jews had to move into those buildings. Luckily, our buildings was designated as a Jewish building, so we didn't have to move out. But 5 families moved into our apartment. Then every day there was another restriction. For instance, we couldn't go out of the apartment only certain hours. We couldn't shop only in certain stores. And so, of course, we couldn't go to school, and all the Jewish stores were closed. And at the same time, the Hungarian towns, except for Budapest, the Jews were taken to created ghettos, and then very quickly after that, in the as well-known cattle cars, taken to extermination camps. But Budapest still was somewhat safe in that respect. But soon they had all men from age 16 to about 60 called in to do some labor. So my father had to leave. And even today, I don't know where they took him and where he was. But very soon after that, they were also taking women from 16 to 43, 42. I just turned 16 and my mother just turned 43. So she was able to stay, but my sister and I, along with all the younger women in the building, had to go and stay, march to a factory where they collected all the Jewish women from Budapest. Now, what do you pack when you called in to go have slave labor camp? Well, we had backpacks and we did pack a change of clothing, but we also packed a couple cans of sardines, some sugar cubes, some vitamins, and a bottle of toilet water, which was actually very useful because all through our camp experience, water was very scarce, just about not even enough to quench your thirst. So we had no water to clean ourselves. That's what we used the toilet water for. Anyway, we took a 2-day march to a factory. It was a brick factory. And the bricks were drying outside and they were lined up in like walls about 2 feet apart from each other. And that's where we stayed. That's where we slept. It was, of course, outdoors, and by then it was October and going on November, so it was not very comfortable. But the work we had to do was to dig ditches. Because the Russians had already crossed the Hungarian border and occupied part of the east and south of Hungary, they were trying to keep the Russian tanks to enter the area close to Budapest. So these ditches, which were about 7 feet deep and maybe 4 feet wide, were to keep the tanks from entering Budapest. So every morning at 5 o'clock or so, we had to get up and with our shovels, which were really quite large and heavy, march to the spot where we were digging the ditches. And all day, except for a short period of rest, we had to do the work. We couldn't, if you were tired and you sat down and you stopped for a while, the guards were poking you with their guns. And if you couldn't go on, you'd kind of disappeared. So it was hard labor, and we got very little to eat, and we just didn't know what and how this is going to end. One day I felt very ill, and I thought maybe I would not go to work and stay behind and kind of hide in my little place between the walls of bricks. And I decided not to leave my sister, and I went anyway, and I did work that day. And it was a good decision because when we got back, we saw a lot of um, sort of disturbed grounds, and there were sticks um, put in the ground, and on the sticks there were women's clothing. And then we found out that anybody who stayed in camp was asked to dig their own grave, get undressed, and they were shot into the grave. The other things they loved to do, and this was true of all concentration camps, there was something called a name that was really French, but it meant attention. And at about 3 o'clock in the morning, we were called out to stand in line, and they were going to decimate the camp. That was usually happened when someone tried to escape, or someone succeeded to escape, or it was a punishment for anything to keep people from doing it. In one such occasion, they called out a mother and child, and they told them to say goodbye because they received a protective paper from Wallenberg, who was there were some countries that were neutral during the war, like Sweden and Switzerland and Portugal, and even the Vatican had issued some protective papers for Jews. And of course, most of the time they were ignored. And this time, this mother and child were going to be punished. So they were told to say goodbye to each other. And I don't know what happened. We never saw them again. Maybe they let them go. At some point, though, it was decided that the original order for the women to leave for the camp was actually 18 to 42, not 16. So I was allowed to go back home. And they gave me some paper, and I walked back home. And it was like heaven, of course. The first thing my mother did was put all my clothing into the bathtub. I can imagine what it looked like. And I was full of lice, but it was just great. But before, I forgot to tell you something, that my sister and I decided that no matter what the conditions were in camp, we were going to try to live as normal life as possible. So every night we changed into our other clothing as if we were going to sleep. And in the morning, we took our vitamins. Anyway, so here I was back home for 2 days when the order came that all Jews in Budapest who were still left there were to go to another brick factory. And in that fact, so my mother and I had to go. Some of my clothing still pretty wet. And we went to this factory, and that was the first time that we actually had a German officer on guard. Up till then, it was the Hungarians. It was the Hungarian soldiers and so-called National Guards who were torturing us. But this time, there was this German officer who was running up and down, yelling, that we are all going to be eingasieren. That was some German word I never heard before, but it meant that we all will be gassed. So we started, but by that time, there were no cattle cars to take us to the concentration camp. So we had to walk. And we were walking what was eventually called the Eichmann Death March. Eichmann, I don't know if you know the henchman of the Germans, Hitler's body, was in charge of exterminating the Hungarian Jews. And so we were on this march on a highway from Budapest to Vienna. We were going to a concentration camp in Mauthausen. So it was a peculiar highway because it was a 4-lane highway, 2 lanes going west. All the Jews from Budapest, 50,000 Jews were marching. On the other side of the highway was the German troops who were going to defend or prevent the Russians to entering Budapest. So all the tanks and officers, cars and everything was constantly moving. One side the Jews, the other side the Germans. And there were so many Jews that there were times that there were not enough guards to guard us. And we came at one point to a little bridge. The highway went over a dried out stream. And my mother said, that's it. And so we grabbed my sister and jumped off the highway and hid under the bridge until we heard that there was a hiatus between the next group of Jews. So we went up to the highway and walked towards the nearest little village. And sure enough, the Hungarian soldier came facing us and said, "What are you doing here?" And my mother, oh, by the way, under the bridge, we changed our clothing so we didn't have the yellow star. And my mother had this story ready somehow in her mind. She said we were coming from a little town which was occupied by the Russians, and we were running away from the Russians. And we had some relatives in this village, and we wanted to find them. And lo and behold, the soldier said, "Oh, I'm from this village. Who are you looking for?" So my mother, very quickly thinking, thought of the least Jewish and the most Hungarian last name and said, "We are looking for them." And the soldier said, "Which one, Joseph or the widow?" And he said, my mother said it was the widow, of course, because it's easier to deal with a woman, I guess. The soldier said, "I'll take you to their house." And sure enough, he did. And we were again lucky because the mother, the widow, and the older children were out on the potato field. And only a 11-year-old girl was taking care of an infant at home. So we told her the same story about we are relatives and we are running away from the Russians, and we didn't know about all these Jews, and we had no papers, and what should we do? And she swallowed it all, and she gave me her school certificate, which of course in Hungary, any kind of certificate will have your religion on it. So it was a certificate with a Christian marked on it. So, and she said, if you want to go to Budapest, go down to the highway and hitchhike. That's what all the Germans are doing. And she said, I'll take you down to the highway. And in the meantime, she was telling us that she found some Jews who were trying to escape and how she turned them in. She was very proud of herself. Anyway, she went with us to the highway, and there was a German officer hitchhiking, going, of course, towards Budapest. And this little girl said, well, go ahead, ask him. So my mother went over to him, and in her perfect German, she said, we are trying to get to Budapest, and there are no trains, no buses. Can you help us? And he said, well, how do I know you're not Jews? And my mother said, well, look at my two blonde children. My sister particularly had a very beautiful blonde hair. And this officer, who was probably well educated, believed that Jews could not look Aryan or blonde. And a German officer bus came by and stopped for him, and we all got on the bus together. And it took us to the outskirts of Budapest, where we went to the railroad station. And but all the railroads were used for military purposes, mostly German soldiers. But somehow or another, we managed to get on one train and sort of hide away. That took us to the outskirts of the city. Of course, now it was dark at night and there was a curfew, and we just couldn't just walk. Where we wanted to go was to some friend's house who were non-Jewish, and we knew that they could help us. So, excuse me.
Maritza, I think you're frozen. Can you maybe turn off your camera and turn it back on? There we go.
Okay.
Yeah, it's good now.
Did you miss anything?
Right
Hello?
when you were taking a drink is when it froze.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay.
Okay.
Anyway, we got to this friend's house and we couldn't stay there because the government constantly checked on both the Jewish and non-Jewish houses to find people who tried to escape. So we had to leave there the next day, and we started to look for a hotel. Oh, in the meantime, we finally got our papers, our false papers. Our friends knew someone who was reliable enough to go to our apartment and look at the hiding place where my father hid the papers. And so we finally had our false papers. We were a whole different family, but one that fit our family group of parents about the same age and two teenage children, girls. So with these papers, we started to look for some hotels, but because there were so many people who were running away from the Russian occupation, the city was full and the hotels were full. But one day we were able to find a so-called pension, which is a small hotel in an apartment building occupying about 2 floors. And strangely enough, it was empty. So we were able to move in, but it turned out that the day before, all the occupants of that motel or pension were taken because they were part of the original Hungarian government that was replaced by the Eurocross, the Hungarian fascist government. And these people who were staying in this pension were found and taken away. But so we had a place to stay, we had a room, we had beds, we had even food at that point. Of course, the place filled up very quickly. Within a day or two, it was full. And so we lived fairly comfortably for a few days. And after maybe about 4 days, my father appeared. Apparently, I don't know where he was or how he escaped, but he also went to these friends that we went to that was prearranged that we'll do that if we are separated, and found out where we were. And so he joined us. And although he was always very worried about having these false papers, that he would endanger us, but we stayed, even though he thought of us going to one of these protected houses that Wallenberg was in charge of. But luckily we didn't do that. My mother wouldn't leave. She had the most incredible mind to deal with any situation. And it so happened that that protected house, the Nazis got to it before Wallenberg could come and protect it. And everybody was marched to the edge of the Danube and shot into the Danube. And this pension where we stayed was fairly close to the river, and we constantly heard the shooting. So the Nazis, both Hungarian, mostly Hungarians at this point, were ruthless. Anyway, soon the Russians got to the city and first started to bomb it every day from almost like a 9-to-5 job. The city was bombed, but the bombs did not go through the building. They were mostly incendiary bombs or just the top floors of the building. So we all had to move down to the cellar, which was a coal cellar. The buildings were still in Hungary at that time, heated by coal. And of course, we had nothing to eat. And so after the bombing stopped around 5 o'clock or at night, we went out and searched for some food, but there really wasn't much of anything. And we somehow survived. lost a few pounds, but we did. And this was at Christmas, around the Christmas Eve and around New Year's. One day, the door to the coal cellar opened, and there was a Russian soldier standing there. So at that point, we knew that we survived. So life was not easy after that either. But as far as the Holocaust for us has ended, and we did survive it. So I'm very honored to be able to tell you this story, and please feel free to ask whatever questions you have.
The honor is ours, Maritza, for sure. Remarkable. And I think about your mom. I was
Yes.
listening to you. I was listening about her. I don't know.
Instincts were unbelievable. I mean, she was saving her children's lives, and she just did everything for us.
And just a reminder before we get to people to ask questions, I don't know the exact numbers, but I know there were roughly over 400,000 Hungarians that were murdered.
Actually, I think the number is more than that. There were about 800,000 Hungarians who were Jews who lived in Hungary, and I believe about 600,000 were killed.
So this is an opportunity both for adults for certain and our boys and girls to ask the questions. You know, it's disturbing, it's important, and I would love and welcome, just unmute yourself and let's begin. Anybody that wishes to, just please ask Maritza.
Hi, Maritza. I'm Robin Cornelison. Thank you so much for doing this. It's very emotional to hear and watch, and so thank you so much for coming on and doing this. And I'm sure this is not something you're used to, doing it on a Zoom call. So thank you for doing that. I was just wondering about your parents. Were they able to make it to this country, and how did you, when you got here? How, just maybe a little bit of that, obviously, just
Sure.
what that experience was.
Actually, my father died very shortly after the liberation of Hungary. He died. Hungary was, the Germans were out of Hungary by April 4th, 1945, and my father died by end of May or so. I can't believe how much pain he must have had and never told us. Anyway, my mother and my sister stayed in Hungary. I was the only one who came to this country. We had some relatives who came to actually New York much before the war, and they asked if anybody from our family wanted to come here. And I was telling before that my sister was a dancer and very successful in her career. She was a choreographer and also taught people who became quite famous, as a matter of fact. Anyway, she didn't want to leave, and she also had a boyfriend who didn't want to leave. And so they got married and stayed in Hungary. So I was the only one who came here.
I'm hoping the boys and girls will ask questions, but I do have one that it's kind of big topic. The whole thing that goes on with Holocaust denial. Okay. How do we combat that? Besides having people like yourself.
Well, I do, I talk, as a matter of fact, this is the first time that I'm talking to an all Jewish audience. Mostly it's high school kids in the city with mixed religions. And hopefully they believe my story. And I guess that's why us survivors try to talk about it as much as we can. So eventually, maybe it will be accepted. There's one thing, though, that I feel that to say something about what my experience was, because it might be helpful for kids if something hard happens to them. I was, at the moment we decided that we were going to escape and we jumped off the highway, I was not afraid for a minute. I was afraid a lot before that. But once we decided to take sort of our life in our hands, that we had our agency, that it was somewhat not in the hands of someone else, I wasn't at all afraid. And I think that was probably true with other people as well. And how important it is not to let other people take your life in their hands. And to stand up for yourself. And as far as anti-Semitism, it's people have asked me, what do we do about anti-Semitism? How can we stop it? And one thing that had occurred to me, that anti-Semitism in Hungary was there forever. I mean, it starts very young, even in the playground. If a new kid appeared on the playground, the first question was, what's your religion? And if we were not the same religion, we knew there would be no friendship. So we didn't play together. And that was basically true through my whole life. I had no non-Jewish friends. We sort of separated, even though we went to the same school. We were almost half Jewish and half non-Jewish in my class. Later on, of course, the numerous classes took care of that, and Jews were in very limited number. But I think if a non-Jewish kid had a friend who was Jewish, and they hung out together and had secrets together, and they saw each other and loved each other, the German propaganda of Jews being an inferior race would never have established by these kids who had Jewish friends. So I think it's important to be able to open up to other religions for both sides.
I have a question. Oh,
Yeah.
sorry. I was wondering, so I've heard a couple of different perspectives, and I wanted to know what you think about, like, if you have any degree of forgiveness for the Nazis, or what you would say to one now, that kind of thing.
I had occasion to meet the Germans in this country who who were about your age during the war. And so I could have been or was suspicious as to where they stood. I mean, we watched the Hitler Jugend. They came to the German young fascist group, came to Hungary, and we saw them there. So I would always wonder if a German of a certain age would have participated in it. I can't forgive the Nazis, of course, for what they did, or unfortunately, even in this country, we have to watch out. And but I think Germany, on the whole, as a country now, is doing better than many of the other countries as far as facing their past. Hungarian government doesn't. They blame it on the Germans, even though Hungarians very much participated in the Nazi fascist movement. But I think, except now, even in Germany, there are some right-wing groups that are forming. So it's not a safe world, but I think you guys are going to make it safe.
Thank you.
Does it answer your question at all? Okay.
Who else has a question?
I have one. So what do you think should be done about the neo-Nazi groups in the US, like the people who marched in Charlottesville and some people who stormed the Capitol recently?
Well, I don't like to get mixed up with current politics, but I hope that with Trump gone and having a new government, that we'll be able to deal with these situations is a good thought, helpful. But I think we should just expose them as much as we can. And I don't know if, how convincing you can be to talk to someone who grew up and really believes all that horrible stuff about being an American fascist. I think we have to fight them everywhere we can. And as long as I'm around, and I'm willing to talk to everybody, to show them what groups like that can do and what it can grow into if we let it happen. The German fascist party was a minority party. There was a time in the 30s, early 30s, and before 31, that Hitler became a chancellor. They could have fought them and got rid of them, but because of various political reasons, they just let it happen. And that's something that we should not.
Julie, you had a question? I think I saw.
I first just wanted to say thank you for sharing your story. But I was wondering how you were able to transition back into normal society and if that was a difficult experience for you and if it was hard to feel like you belonged at that time.
Julie, you look just like my granddaughter, exactly. Anyway, I'm asked that question many times because it does seem like once you have this experience, it's going to live with you forever. Well, I won't ever forget it, of course, but it was such an anomaly, such an unusual happening that I didn't really associate it with real life. It was like, it was just something horrible that was happening then. And now that after I survived it, I can just put it in a cubicle where it sits and it doesn't really affect the rest of my life. Of course, I was 16 years old, and that helped because I had quite a long life after that. I am now 92, so a lot of things happened since then, good things. And yeah.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I have a question.
Go ahead.
Thank you for sharing your story. I was just wondering, have you recorded your story either with like the Shoah Foundation
Yes.
or any other type of organization so that the story will be remembered
Yes.
forever, also on video?
Yes, I did participate in the Shoah Foundation, and I gave the testimony. To tell you how much I shortened it this time, the original testimony was 3 hours long.
Wow.
I left out a lot of things because I wanted time left for questions. But yes, it's also, when I first talked at the Museum of Jewish Heritage, they recorded it and it's on YouTube. If you go on YouTube and put my name there, you'll get the same story.
Thank you for sharing that story with us.
I thank you.
I don't know if there's anyone else. First of all, I too want to thank you for, you were a remarkable person and a remarkable life. It's inspiring, it's concerning, but I think that that you now have all of us here to help bear witness. So I just want to personally wish you only good things. And just so you know, for everyone that's here, in case someone missed it, it is being recorded. We will have it on YouTube. We will also have it, I guess, up on our website. If you need someone to, review this, etc. I don't know how to thank you enough. I really don't. It's been inspiring.
Thank you so much for all the nice things you said. And
Appreciate it.
I love to all the kids.
Thank you again, and we wish everyone
Thank
a good
you.
night. Be well.
Thank you, guys.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.